In the 19th century, moral treatment, a European idea, came to the United States. Moral treatment was the idea that mental illness could be cured if patients were treated humanely in specifically contracted hospitals known as asylums. 1814 marked the year that the idea was incorporated into American healthcare, as the Friends Asylum opened in the Philadelphia Quaker community. Later, the Pennsylvania Hospital opened the Institute of the Pennsylvania Hospital in 1841. Thomas Kirkbride, the medical superintendent of the Institute of the Pennsylvania Hospital, created the Kirkbride Plan, which limited asylums to a maximum of 250 patients and detailed the construction plan of long, winding wings for optimal treatment results, believing that doctors and insane asylum staff had a responsibility towards ensuring the insane were treated with basic human rights.
However, public almshouses remained mostly the same in the first half of the 19th century. The conditions in almshouses were abysmal at best and often overcrowded. Admission into an asylum or almshouse was commonly done in two ways, by doctors or by court order. For women specifically, their spouses were often involved heavily in either option. When women were taken to doctors for their mental health, they saw either a gynecologist, a neurologist, or an alienist, which is today known as a psychiatrist. During this period, medical specialization was just beginning. Specialists didn't need to pass an exam until the 20th century, affecting the quality of medical opinions and their research. The three types of specialties all had very different viewpoints surrounding the origin of insanity in women, gynecologists especially, and each specialty believed they had the sole responsibility to treat insane women. Gynecologists thought that diseased reproductive organs caused insanity in women. Horatio Storer, a gynecologist from Boston, proclaimed that removing the diseased organs also removed insanity. Because insanity was so entwined with the reproductive system, gynecologists concluded that women faced a high likelihood of insanity during three periods of life: puberty, pregnancy, and menopause. The most cases of insanity were seen during or directly after pregnancy. Gynecologists named this puerperal insanity. Puerperal insanity was further classified into three types: gestation, lactation, and parturition. It was extremely common and responsible for 10% of female asylum admissions. While alienists and neurologists often disagreed, they collectively thought that the gynecological explanation for insanity was incredibly wrong. They believed the central nervous system was the cause of mental illness, as the nervous system would be triggered by sociological or environmental issues. Therefore, neurologists and alienists theorized that issues in the female reproductive system could trigger the central nervous system. While the reproductive system played a role in insanity, it wasn't the main issue, as once the nerves were stimulated, treating insanity meant treating the nerves. Even though the central nervous system caused insanity in men and women, alienists and neurologists thought that nerves were a feminine trait, meaning that women were more prone to insanity because their nervous systems were much more sensitive than men's. The science backing this perspective on insanity was harder to disprove than the science behind the gynecologist's theory because it was constructed around the intangible feminineness of the nerves and nervous system, limiting counterarguments. Despite the difference in the direct causes of female insanity, all three specialists were of the viewpoint that the contrast between men and women transferred into their social roles. This viewpoint seeped into their medical research and was the basis for the diagnosis of women's mental health issues. Gynecology's specific tie of the reproductive system to women's mental illness diminished women's complaints about their health to no more than their reproductive organs, limiting the treatments available to them. The responsibility each specialization had towards the treatment of women led to the repression of women's rights.
The different viewpoints between the three also encouraged competition. Healthcare, at its foundation, is a business. By relating women's mental health to their specific specialties, doctors were ensuring that their business remained profitable and that they were employed. Gynecologists' relation to the reproductive system ensured that women with possible mental health issues would have to see them for treatment and that they were employed in many asylums. The need for profit and competition affected the diagnosis that women received, as they were biased towards a specific specialty.
Alice May Farnham, an assistant physician at the Willard Asylum for the Insane, described this stating, "And the alienist and neurologist beheld his hysterical, melancholic, and maniacal patients torn from his grasp, and by the wave of public opinion cast into the hands of his brother practitioner, the gynecologist." The popularity of the gynecological belief called the woman as womb idea caused many women to be admitted into insane asylums for reasons such as insane by childbirth, suppressed menses, meaning suppressed menstruation, nymphomania, and abortion, as the reasons for insanity all revolved around women's reproductive systems. In asylums, women receive treatment such as pessuraries, which are placed into the vagina to assist the rectum, bladder, or uterus. Other treatments included leeches, chemicals, rest, purging, sedation, hydrotherapy, or the surgical removal of reproductive organs that were believed to be malfunctioning.
These hospitals, specifically the public ones, were underfunded and were not up to code. Walls were tearing and molding, or were even straight up concrete. In the winter months, it was cold and patients never had enough clothing. Women were often put in a common room in which they would sleep with no privacy. In extreme cases, when female patients were seen as very dangerous, they would be locked into separate buildings and left in isolation. Some would be tied down to their beds or chairs as a way of keeping themselves and others safe. Often, workers were treating the women with extreme cruelty. Nurses would force them to receive numerous harsh treatments and were rarely properly medically trained. The caretakers would abandon their responsibilities towards the well-being of the mentally ill women, therefore reducing them to something less than human, stripping away their rights. Many insane women who were released shared their stories, including Elizabeth Packard and Nellie Bly.
On June 18, 1860, Packard was physically dragged out of her home after having her room door broken in with an axe, and then carried to a train. She was then placed in the Illinois Hospital for the Insane by her husband due to her religious beliefs, where she spent 3 years. Her husband was able to do this because of an Illinois state law, enacted in 1841, that let medical superintendents of insane asylums judge the conditions of married women, and if they were evidently insane, they could be admitted into the asylum by their spouse without further evidence. Packard was diagnosed with moral insanity, meaning her emotions and morals were irrational, but her intelligence wasn't affected. During her stay, she wrote her first book, Christianity and Calvinism Compared. Beneath her book title was a note that read, edited by a slave now imprisoned in Jacksonville Insane Asylum, placed there by her husband for thinking. Written under the inspection of Dr. M. Farland, Superintendent of the Insane Asylum, Jacksonville.
When she returned home, her husband kept her locked away from the public and was planning to send her to another asylum in Massachusetts. Her friend obtained a writ of habeas corpus, requiring her husband to have proof of her insanity. A week-long trial followed in which Packard was determined sane by an all-male jury. However, her husband left her, taking the belongings and children. Packard was left without shelter, money, or her family. This changed something in her, and she began a fight for women's rights. In 1865, she helped pass what she called the Personal Liberty Bill, requiring due process and a jury trial before anyone is committed into an asylum in Illinois, removing husbands' ability to easily commit their wives. She helped pass more laws, such as one in 1869, which let married women in Illinois keep their income they earned. Another important figure in the movement was a journalist known by her pen name, Nellie Bly. Bly went undercover at the New York City Mental Health Hospital on Blackwell's Island. There, she was able to show the horrific treatments and conditions patients went through. After being released, she wrote the famous book, 10 Days in a Madhouse, an autobiography about her time there. She went on to shed light on the conditions in places like these and the abuse that many patients face. In her book, she details the poor conditions of the hospital, stating that they were forced to eat horrifically bad food, were cold, and were abused by nurses. Her work called attention to the asylums, sparking disciplinary action and increased the budget by $1 million for asylum in New York.
Nellie Bly and Elizabeth Packard called attention to the doctors, insane asylum staff, and state governments who used their responsibility towards the treatment of insane women in a way that repressed their rights, through abuse, biased diagnosing, and the horrific conditions of insane asylums. By doing this, Bly and Packard forced doctors, staff, and state governments to instead take responsibility for reform. The asylum and many popular gynecological diseases slowly began to disappear in the late 20th century. Now, many laws, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, protect the rights of mentally ill women, while also controlling the responsibility the government and doctors have towards supporting those rights.